that. Yeah. Okay. And can you see my slide there with the mountains? Okay, terrific. We're on the right track then. And I can see from those who have joined, we've got one of those who drove north with us, George Putnam, and then also some friends from many years past and folks who've been in the community. Hello, Lorelei, and pleased to meet the other folks who I have not yet had the pleasure of saying hello to in person. So as mentioned, we're here to talk about the Arctic Road Rally. And the Arctic Road Rally, as you can see by at least one of those logos on the bottom right there, is a project that was funded through the U.S. Department of Energy, in particular the Office of Technology Transitions, through an energy project for innovation clusters program. And really, this Arctic Road Rally is about technology demonstration to bring some of that innovation into the transportation space. And as Bernie mentioned, Launch Alaska was really helping lead this whole program, but it was absolutely integral to have folks from Alaska Electric Vehicle Association in this event, in particular, Dimitri Shane and then Devin Kibbe. Many of you who've been in the EV space for a while here in Alaska know those two individuals, I'm sure, very well. And they, as you'll hear, were integral in the implementation, putting some of those charging stations in, as well as doing a lot of volunteer coordination. And then that fourth logo, the one on the left there, is the Center for Transportation and the Environment. And they are a nonprofit similar to what Launch Alaska is, really helping advance innovation in the transportation space particularly. So we worked with them both on the Arctic Road Rally project, and then most recently also on the Clean Transportation Leadership Roundtable event, which was about 2.5 weeks ago now. But they do quite a lot of work in the medium and heavy duty vehicle space, which we'll touch on a little bit today as well. Now, many of you probably know some of that background of who Launch Alaska is, but a quick overview for folks who we might be new to. We're a nonprofit, we're a deployment accelerator. And what that typically means, if you've seen some of those business accelerators in the past, is that we work with startup companies from Alaska, from outside the lower 48, and then globally as well. And those are startups that have some sort of a technology solution that is climate tech, essentially, in one of the three sectors that you can see across the bottom there, in energy, industry, or transportation. So what we're looking for is either hardware or software solutions to the pain points that the industry or the asset or infrastructure owners have here in Alaska. And so there's some vetting of the technology that we do through our program. And then there's also quite a lot of matchmaking, essentially. And I think of that almost like the old-fashioned operator. We're connecting this need over here to this potential solution over here. And when we are working with those startup companies, it's usually those who have technology options that are close to commercialization, but not yet ready for the market. So again, that tech validation is going to be an important step that we move through. And then positioning them to ensure that they can prove out their technology in a place like Alaska, which we all know has some unique conditions. And if we can do this here in Alaska, we know that in most cases, we can do it just about anywhere. So that's one side of the shop. And then we also do a lot of project development or pre-development work. And that is really to basically take some of those great ideas that sometimes are on the shelf and help move them towards completion, help move them towards steel on the ground or construction projects. And those, again, are in the energy industry or transportation space. This project, as I mentioned with the Arctic Road Rally, is one of the types of projects that we do. We do run the gamut, from vulnerability assessments for utilities to assisting in microgrid projects with the Port of Alaska. But this last one here, the Arctic Road Rally, is the one that's caught some attention most recently in the news. So what is the Road Rally? Kind of quick recap here. As Bernie mentioned, we had 10 electric vehicles that ran up the road. This is from Fairbanks at the starting point, all the way up to the northernmost drivable point in the US, which is at Elliptic Point. George had his vehicle as one of those 10. And we'll get into those vehicles in a moment more. But to do so, to get those vehicles up and down the road, for anybody that's driven up there, this won't be a surprise. There were not charging stations until we put them in for temporary installations. There's really limited infrastructure along the Dalton Highway or the Hall Road, except, of course, for what you see in the back behind Rob there. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline is, of course, a massive piece of infrastructure, right? But along the road, there really aren't that many places that provide electricity. So moving north from Fairbanks, there are a couple of places where there's some diesel gen sets and then also some gas-fired turbines. And so we had to do some temporary installation of those charging stations along the way. Why did we choose this route? Well, I think it's known in the reality TV world, Ice Road Truckers, but this is an iconic place even in Alaska. You know, it's in a fairly remote stretch of road. And to be able to prove out the performance of electric vehicles, to demonstrate electric vehicles on this road seemed like a really good opportunity for us to raise some awareness around EV use. We couldn't have done this without a lot of community support and partnership here. I'm sure most of these logos and names on the screen are all very familiar. I'm sure many of you work with them directly as well. You know, one of our lead sponsors over on the upper right there is Alyeska Tire, and you'll see a video here momentarily that they helped create. Alyeska Tire came in early as a supporter and sponsor for the Arctic Road Rally. And as you would guess, if you've driven the haul road, you need some spare tires when you're going up a remote stretch of gravel like that, with the expectation that you'll probably get at least one flat. We worked with a lot of our state agencies and academic institutions like Alaska Energy Authority and the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. And then, of course, ACEP is probably a common name for many of you on the phone, ACEP, Alaska Center for Energy and Power, as well as some of our local utilities. And Golden Valley was an absolute critical component on the south end of the route. And then on the northern end of the route, we had a huge welcome and very warm welcome from ConocoPhillips, who really rolled out the carpet to us, provided us lodging, and then helped do the make-ready infrastructure when we were up past the security gate, beyond Dead Horse, essentially. And then Seekins Ford, and I got to put a shout out to all of the Seekins staff up there in Fairbanks, as well as Ford Pro at the headquarters level down in the U.S., lower 48. They provided a Ford Lightning for us, which you'll see in a couple of the photos. And that was a fantastic vehicle to drive, a lot of fun, but there were other vehicle providers in there as well. So I'm going to do a quick transition on my screens here, and we're going to get into a short video that I mentioned came from the production from Alyeska Tire. And Alyeska Tire hired a group called Arm Creative, which is their agency on record, to do this. And this is shots of our first day right in the Golden Valley parking lot. But this helps demonstrate some of that partnership that I was mentioning that really made this whole thing possible. So it's about 3 minutes long, and I'll come back here after 3 minutes.
Hey there, I'm Tim Leach. I'm the transportation lead with Launch Alaska, and I've been helping manage the Arctic Road Rally that we are just starting here in Fairbanks, Alaska. We are so excited to have 10 electric vehicles going for really the first time ever to the northernmost drivable point in the U.S.
We temporarily electrified the entire Dalton Highway. It's an 800-mile gravel road. None of it's for electric vehicles, and none of it's really for driving. So we're going to be able to go out there now for the first time ever, drive to the northernmost drivable point in North America in these vehicles that have just now become available, testing it in one of the most rugged, remote places in all the world, that's Alaska. What we're actually doing now, though, is introducing modern technology that can make everybody's lives a bit better, whether it's Native Alaskans and remote communities, and whether it's our oil and gas partners on the North Slope. Electric vehicles have a really vital part in that. So driving them to the northernmost drivable point in North America is really showing that these technologies are ready for Alaska, and Alaska is ready for these technologies.
Electric vehicles have incredible performance. They also reduce cost for us, and I think for consumers in all walks of life, that's going to be really critical. So that belief that I have of really moving towards electrification of transportation is really part of what's driving me, part of what's gotten me involved in this whole experience. This year in 2022 is really a test drive for next year in 2023 when we are going to be scaling this event. We've already received some interest really from larger OEMs, larger vehicle OEMs around this medium duty and heavy duty vehicle side that may be speaking to that audience who work the Dalton Highway on an everyday basis for their job.
The first big win was Alyeska Tire stepping up because they believed in this event and what it means for the future of Alaska. And that was the tipping point for what we were able to do here today. With Alyeska Tire's sponsorship, we attracted the interest of other major OEMs who provided vehicles, who have provided support teams, who have provided us guidance as we're rolling out this electric infrastructure on the North Slope. What excited me was seeing the same excitement in other people's eyes when they realized, like, this is something that I want to participate in. And frankly, it all started with Alaska Tire.
Now, I know everybody can't be with us in the vehicles or drive along with us, so the place to find information and updates is the arcticroadrarally.com website. Appreciate all of the support from all of our community partners and the dedication of so many of the drivers that have brought their personal vehicles from Alaska and in some places Arizona and California. Many people have driven many thousands of miles already on electric vehicles and charging to get to this location, which is just the starting line of the Arctic Road Rally. Huge appreciation for all of this as we move towards vehicle electrification to everyone involved.
Okay, thanks for hanging with me as I do this quick transition back here. Okay, if I click through. Okay, I think we're seeing, you should be seeing a quote now on the screen that starts with the word Alaska. Is
Yes.
that had not perfect? Thanks for the tech confirmation there. Appreciate it. So yeah, as you heard here in the video, there was an amazing outpouring of community support and the partnerships there. And, you know, why did all of that come forward? We all are interested in healthy communities. We are all interested in strong infrastructure that will help drive innovation. And those partners really stepped forward in a big way with a variety of means of support, whether that was the expertise or financial support, lending of equipment, and sometimes a lot of the people power, the man hours, the woman hours behind it as well. So really big thanks to all of those partnerships. So the U.S. Department of Energy, of course, again, was pivotal in this whole thing. And as you can see on the screen here, the director of the Arctic Energy Office, George Rowe, who many of you who might know George directly, George really sees what we can do in Alaska as something pivotal for electrification of transportation. Certainly we're seeing, if you're looking at headlines, for example, around EVs, we're seeing a lot of adoption of electric vehicles throughout the US and even globally, especially in places like Norway. But we're seeing an opportunity here for us in Alaska to really push the outer limits of some of the technology solutions for the ground vehicles, as well as for other modes of transportation. We can certainly talk about that sometime if you want to as well. Why is the Department of Energy, why is the federal government interested in electric vehicles to start with? Most of you probably know of the broad benefits that come from vehicle electrification. Cost savings, you know, I mentioned that in the video. That typically comes through reduced costs when you're energizing or powering up a battery bank in an electric vehicle. It's cheaper to do that than to gas up a diesel or gasoline vehicle in almost all the locations in Alaska. And in almost all the locations in Alaska, there's also a emission benefit. And honestly, if you're looking at the driving experience, it's a whole lot of fun. So that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of either. For policy drivers at the federal level, especially, you know, why is the infrastructure bill, for example, there that has put so much money towards clean transportation at a large level? It's really often driven by that emissions reduction desire that the current administration has, and many of the legislators there do as well. This is a quick breakdown. You can see on the left there that out of our total emissions as an economy in the US in 2020, we had about 27% of that come from transportation. So that's the biggest sectoral emissions that we get. And that means that there's a lot of opportunity to make some impact and hopefully reduce some of those emissions. You can see on the right side there, that pie graph represents the different types of transportation for different types of modes of transportation as well as on ground. You know, the light duties represent a 57% chunk of the emissions. So for those cars that you and I have in our parking, in our garages or in our driveways or trucks, that's that 57% pie wedge. And then for those who are driving the big rigs up on the haul road, for example, that's that next section down, the 26%, kind of that second shade, darkest shade of green there. And that really does key into some of the reasons that we were doing this whole Arctic Road Rally. We were interested in doing this technology demonstration so that we could expand public awareness around electric vehicles, their performance, their benefits, and potentially some of their limitations and challenges here too. So I'll touch on challenges on the next slide in a little bit more. But I can tell you, driving this vehicle that you can see on the screen here, this is the Ford Lightning. It's the base model, or that vehicle is the base model. And so that meant on paved roads in good conditions, it had about 220 miles of range. Well, we quickly saw, as we noted when we hit the gravel, when there's a rougher rolling surface, that estimated mileage drops There's something similar that happens when you're talking about cold weather, and we can also talk about that further if folks want to. So that range anxiety is a term that many folks maybe either know or experience or have experienced, or who might see that as a potential barrier to electric vehicle adoption. So this was one way of proving out that, yes, we can drive electric vehicles on a road like this that is obviously fairly long, about 1,100 miles round trip for us, with a sparse but adequate level of electric vehicle charging along the route. And we can do so in a way that proves out that vehicles can drive up and down even a rough road like this. Now, all of this is really oriented towards driving innovation. So part of what we were doing was collecting information on the vehicle performance this year, and we'll be continuing to do that next year in 2023 in a more robust way. So that information that we were collecting in regards to the conversations we were having with fleet managers and drivers up on the North Slope for business use cases, and then what the operational environment was going to demand on vehicles, particularly for the cold challenge that we know is there in Alaska broadly, but also up there, of course. That's information we can bring back to the original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, as you probably heard me mention in the slide there in the video. All of that innovation also, of course, is something that we're hoping to do with increased adoption of the technology once we've got that innovation there. That's part of what we're hoping to do to, stemming from raising awareness and eventually ending in this vehicle adoption, where we're helping consumers choose an electric vehicle where those the cost and environmental performance benefits. I mentioned range anxiety as one of the barriers. There are a few others here on the screen you can see that are typically perceived barriers to electric vehicle adoption. Purchase prices, I'd say, a real barrier rather than a perceived one. But that's something we're starting to see, that there is a decrease in terms of the models that are coming on in the next few years, a decrease in the purchase price. We can give a quick snapshot as to where the average price of electric vehicle stands today, or last year at least. It was about $66,000. And I got to admit, when I look at that sticker price, there's some sticker shock there. But that compares to about $46,000 for the average sales price for new vehicles that are internal combustion engine vehicles. So there is that price premium for EVs as of last year and continuing today. Usually under most driving conditions or user conditions, you'll see that the savings in operation cost actually end up more than outweighing that initial purchase price premium that's there. So you actually save money overall over the life cycle of the vehicle by going to an electric vehicle. Model availability is definitely a challenge, and we're starting to see that remedied as more of the manufacturers come out with vehicles that we like to drive, the trucks, the SUVs, ones that are palatable to the folks that are in rugged terrain, as well as in the workforce who might need a pickup bed with lots of electric outlets in the back, like the Ford Lightning does and some of the others do. EV charging infrastructure. Now, this is a big one. This is something that I'm sure many of you who have been paying attention to some of the EV discussion here in Alaska have seen that there are some solutions that have been brought through the Alaska Energy Authority. In particular, over the last couple of years, some of the VW money that was there under the Dieselgate scandal, if you will, has been brought to charging or putting in charging stations along our rail belt, going from the Homer to the Fairbanks route, for example. The infrastructure bill is helping bring about $52 million more in federal funding to put more charging stations along a couple of different corridors to start with. One of those is the Anchorage to Fairbanks route over the next 2 years, and then on down through our national highway system and the marine highway system on a couple of years beyond that. And then if we're still have funds available, the state tells us that there'll be a prioritization at that point for rural communities as well as some destination charging. So that's a barrier, certainly, but it's one that's being worked on right now. The middle one on the bottom there, the rates and electric demand charges one, is one that we thankfully have done a lot of work on in Alaska and have come to a solution with the electric utilities and then with the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. So I won't go too much into detail there, but there's been a solution to reduce the cost of fast charging and ensure that folks who wanted to have one of these fast charging stations, like the one you see there in the background in the photo, that they could then resell electricity and they wouldn't be caught in the crosshairs of regulation. Now, cold weather performance is always a big one that is on people's minds, and definitely ask me questions on this later if you'd like. But the basic overview here is that cold weather, just as we experience, with our cell phones, does reduce the life, if you will, of the battery, or reduce the amount of available energy in the battery is a better way to state it. And then with the electric vehicle, there's a little bit more sophistication in the technology with battery thermal management. But all of that means there's less energy from the battery that gets used to propel the vehicle down the road. More of it's for space heating, as you probably can intuit or have experienced yourself, like George. So all of that means on a good day in the summer, if you have 300 miles of range, on some of the coldest days, you're probably around half of that range that's available for moving down the road. So a 300-mile vehicle would be about 150 miles of available range in those really cold days in the wintertime. And that kind of comes back to that range anxiety piece. As we get more charging stations, that range anxiety reduces. And I can tell you again, from driving that F-150 up the Hall Road, there were times, especially as we were moving north through Adigan Pass and then up to Dead Horse, where we went through about 18 miles of construction, and there was really soft gravel, essentially. And there was points where actually the undercarriage of the F-150 was dragging on the gravel. It was so soft. And that really increased the rolling resistance, as you'd guess. And we could see our available range dropping pretty quick. So we rolled into Dead Horse at about 19 miles left of range. And that was, it's cutting a little close. So you're thinking, am I gonna have to do some hitchhiking here? But that's that range anxiety thing. And again, if we can do that up there, I think there's a good chance we can do it in most locations. The trip, most of you are probably familiar with the Dalton Highway. This is obviously a very detailed map here of the Dalton Highway. You can see, though, along those points that are noted, from Fairbanks, we started there at Golden Valley Electric Association's parking lot, where there are 2 charging stations, fast charging stations. The next stop there, just north of the Yukon River, actually, was our partner DOT, where we put in a charging station at their 7-mile camp. That's run on a diesel generator, and we'll touch on that momentarily. Moving up from there, we worked with Coldfoot Camp also to put a charging station for fast charging or DC fast charging, and then level 2 or kind of medium speed charging, if you will. And then moving from there up to the Brooks Range Gateway as labeled, that's actually at Pump Station 4 for the Alaska Pipeline Service Company. Very gracious to have been hosted by them as well. I appreciate their support there. Dead Horse, we worked with ConAm and Dead Horse Aviation Center to put in fast and level 2 charging in those locations. And then moved as a convoy beyond that through the security gate over to Kaparak Operations Center, where we were hosted by Conoco for a couple of nights before we got all the way up to Electric Point, which is right there at the waters of the Arctic Ocean, and essentially our turning point for the whole thing. Now, this route, another reason we chose this, is really emblematic as it stands today with that mix of generation resources. It's really emblematic of what we see in a lot of our rural communities in Alaska, especially, where it's not always gas-fired generation. So we have to be doing some thinking about that as we talk about vehicle electrification. The charging, we connected in this year in 2022 to the existing generation resources. And you can see really clearly in the back on that right side there, the image on the right side, you got the Cummins brand there, the power plant there in Conoco, in Dead Horse. Try again, in Coldfoot, there we go, is really that diesel that's sitting there not too far from the cafe. And so you can see in front of that with the Alyeska label on that, that's a DC fast charging. If you haven't seen one before, that's what that looks like. So we had a couple of those connected directly into the diesel there. Now, that's not optimal at all from an emissions perspective. It can be from a cost perspective, but it's producing just a little bit more emissions from carbon dioxide, for example, in comparison to if we were driving a normal or a traditional vehicle, internal combustion vehicle. So yes, this is what currently is there. And the idea is to help demonstrate what electric vehicles can do. But it's really important to recognize that we don't want to stay here, right, in the spot where we're connecting into diesels with EVs. So we want to move to something else that has a lower carbon footprint for the generation or power generation. But again, this is a spot where there's fairly undeveloped or underdeveloped infrastructure from the electrical grid side. Again, fairly illustrative of other locations that are rural, not just in Alaska, but elsewhere. And the idea of bringing different types of power generation into the mix can be very helpful to help us move towards decarbonized transportation. And this moves a little bit towards next year and what we're planning on and working on right now. This year, we had fantastic support from volunteer drivers. And what we're hoping to do is increase for next year the OEM or the original equipment manufacturer presence. And again, what does that OEM stand for? These are the large companies like the GMs and the Fords, the legacy manufacturers, essentially, as well as some of those newer players, whether this is the Teslas or the Rivians of the world that are bringing vehicles to the market, electric vehicles to the market. And we're definitely interested in bringing on the power side, the solutions that I was just mentioning, to really try to demonstrate some of these options for us, especially in remote locations, to bring low carbon or no carbon electric vehicle charging options to the table. So what this could look like is bringing a compressed natural gas tube truck or tube trailer, excuse me, down from the North Slope. Obviously, there's some carbon in that, but it's reduced carbon compared to diesel. Could be hydrogen fuel cell charging stations as well. Those are a couple of the options that we're considering and working with partners on to see if we can then bring them into the play next year. Thinking about the actual charging stations themselves, this year we used recommissioned charging stations that were sourced by Akiva, and it was great to do that for cost savings. Those were 50 kW or kilowatt units. So what we've been installing in Alaska is 50 kW units. And from a market adoption perspective, those are really on the small, kind of slow charge end of the fast charge spectrum. And so what is more common standard now is the 150 kW or kilowatt standard, and they can go up from there in terms of their power capacity. What that means from a user perspective is when you increase the power, excuse me, you decrease the charging time, which again, for user experience can be pretty advantageous, unless you're on a road trip like this, where you do need some rest time, you need to go stretch your legs. But that'll help demonstrate what we'd like to see along other stretches of road here in Alaska and then in the US, of course, too. And like we did this year, we were really trying to focus on bringing some of the newly released vehicles into the mix for the road rally. And that's something that we're continuing to pursue for next year. We saw certainly a lot of continued interest around the Teslas like George's that were in the rally this year. And it's fantastic that those are now kind of like, hey, those are Teslas. We've seen those before. Like that's kind of the stage where we're at. Not to diminish, George, the coolness of your vehicle. But there was a lot of also interest and excitement around the vehicles that had just been rolling off of the production line. So whether that was the GM EV Hummer, whether that was the Ford F-150 Lightning, or the Rivian vehicles, we had both the truck models and then the SUV models. The SUV model that was in the rally was actually a pre-production unit. And I think it was the week that we started the Arctic Road Rally was like the first production units were rolling off of the line there. So those were like really brand new. So there's a lot of interest in seeing those, just being able to go basically kick the tires on those and hear the user experience as they were driving up the road. And then for next year, really increasing to expand those partnerships that I touched on earlier with industry, especially. We were incredibly pleasantly surprised. We knew the partnership with ConocoPhillips was strong, but when we got up to the north end, one of the things that they did with us and for us was to have a car show, essentially. And this is pretty unique. You can kind of visualize this. We're at the Kaparak Operations Center there. They open up one of their big vehicle bays, and they invited those who were doing their shift change in from the fields to basically come and talk with the drivers, check out the vehicles, sit in them. We had a few folks drive a couple of the vehicles, but this was essentially the northernmost and I'd say coolest car show that we've had in North America. I've seen a few of these car shows or EV car shows now in various places, both in Norway and the US. What we had up at the KOC facility really had some of the newest vehicles that I haven't seen in other locations. So that was pretty unique. And that was really, again, through that strength of the partnership with Conoco. So we're looking to work with others in the industry up there who are expressing interest in dipping their toe into the vehicle electrification waters. And with that, I want to say thank you so much to Commonwealth North for providing the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Arctic Road Rally. I've been talking here on screen as I mentioned throughout the presentation. George Putnam is here as a driver. He has, I'm sure, plenty of good things or maybe critiques to share as well around his experience. But I'll turn it back over to Bernie and Juanetta. If there are questions, I'd be happy to speak to those as well.
Sure, Tim. A question on the charging stations. When you have 10 vehicles there, how many outlets of the charging did you have? And I guess, did it take a long time to get all 10 vehicles charged? How did y'all manage that? Was it like a half a day or something to get them all charged up?
Yeah, good kind of logistics question there. So, imagine if we did, to your point, Bernie, roll out all at the same time from the start line there in the Golden Valley parking lot. We would all essentially arrive roughly at the same time at that first charging station. And this gets to the numbers game, how many plugs do you have available and how many vehicles need to be charged. So this was some of the work that Devin Kibbe in particular did, Devin from Alaska Electric Vehicle Association, where it was basically pulling together this large spreadsheet to say, okay, we've got this many plugs at each of the locations. Some of those were fast chargers, some of those with level 2, which are essentially slower chargers. And then also knowing the battery capacity, how big of a battery pack, say the Rivian has versus the Ford versus the Model X, the Tesla vehicles, or Y or Model 3 or S. We had all three of them. All four of them. That was basically a large puzzle that Devin reconfigured to ensure that we were going to spend less time all clustered up at one individual charging point. And what that effectively meant was that we spread out or staggered the start times from our departures in the mornings. So Golden Valley, moving north, we had vehicles roll out roughly every half an hour, and some of them that had the bigger battery packs that could essentially make it all the way up to Coldfoot without having to worry about stopping in between. There was less of a concern about them because they could stop in, plug in at the Yukon River or the 7 Mile Camp for a little bit. But they didn't necessarily need a lot of energy to ensure that they were going to be making it to Coldfoot with an adequate margin of reserve there. So that was a big logistics puzzle. And I'm really happy that Devin was able to do some solving of the puzzle for that.
Exciting, I tell you.
Anybody else with questions? I'm having some latency issues, so I'm going to keep my camera off, but you can put questions in chat or open your mic and ask questions. Feel free to do that.
Yeah, I've got a question. This is David. Tim, this is all pretty interesting. I'm not really surprised about the success of this, but it seems to me the real test is what happens in the wintertime. Is there any thought to doing something like this, January, February sometime, to see how these vehicles perform in really cold temperatures and also in snowy conditions? Seems to me that's kind of the test that's applicable to what's going on in Alaska.
Yeah, thank you so much for actually asking that question. I touched briefly on that cold weather thing, and this gives us a chance to go a little deeper. So yes, there is thought, excuse me, the short answer is yes, there is some thought about doing something like this along the same route in the depth of winter there, where we're really proving the limits essentially when we get down below -40 or so on. A lot of these vehicles, as those who kind of follow the industry, whether it's EV or traditional vehicles, know that there's the camouflage vehicles that appear fairly frequently in Fairbanks. They're doing that pre-production testing for cold weather. Unfortunately, that data that they collect it's not easily accessible to us out here in the public. And we've been asking politely for a while now for the various OEMs to see if we can help get that information into the hands of especially audiences here in Alaska, because that question, how do these things perform in the cold, especially when it gets really cold? We're not talking like, upper Midwest, we're talking Alaska interior cold. So that information is something that's has not been provided by the OEMs yet. And they can say, hey, this has been tested in various places, Fairbanks included, but it's really for some of us, it's really nice to see the data. And so on the data side, and this gets a little bit back to the testing that we would like to do for this type of an event. We're also in parallel collecting information about vehicle performance in places like Fairbanks. And then we will be collecting information on some of the performance of the vehicles with partners up on the North Slope. So there's an F-150 that got delivered in early September to the Alpine pad. And then we're also going to be working with other partners, mostly on the F-150s that are going to be delivered this year. And then next year, there'll be some Chevy Silverados, and then I think a Rivian actually. So all of that helps us put, data points on this projected graph here that we've got some very helpful information to start with as well. So we've done some modeling, I should say, and this is with our partners at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, in particular at ACEP. And so using what is in the published literature that goes down to about -4 Fahrenheit, we know very clearly what that relation between cold weather, cold temperatures, and vehicle range is like. And below that -4 point in terms of temperature, we're able to estimate that curve downwards. And then what the information is doing in terms of the information we're collecting on those Teslas in Fairbanks, in particular, is helping us put actual data points on the estimated graph, which is also showing that our estimations are pretty accurate. All of that comes back to at really cold temperatures, say it's -40, you lose about half the range there.
Okay, that's
What we'd like to do again is just prove that out when we're going into these extreme environments. Some of that's on that battery performance side. And then on the just harsh conditions, harsh driving conditions, that's something that we're also interested in and certainly have heard of from others as well.
Okay, great. I think Jack and then George, did you have something? Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I don't own an electric vehicle, but one of the big selling points is that maintenance is supposed to be easier. There's less moving parts. You even replace the brake pads less often. So I guess I'm curious, this might be a question for George or someone who owns an electric vehicle in Alaska. But I'm curious what, upkeep and maintenance looks like right now in the state for electric vehicles, and whether that is a challenge or whether it's incredibly easy.
George, do you want to take that one on the use for your vehicle or the maintenance for your vehicle?
I'm happy to address my personal experience. I'm 7 years driving an electric vehicle in the state. And there are challenges with maintenance, but those maintenance challenges are much fewer than my wife's diesel vehicle. The issue of getting parts, and there are actually only 2 service technicians in the entire state for Tesla. And there are now over 800 Tesla vehicles in the state. So the service is spread pretty thin compared to what it was even 5 years ago. But the service required is much less. The observation about replacing brakes is absolutely dead on accurate. When I returned from the slope and took my wheels off to check everything, I also checked the brakes, and my car has 37,000 miles on it. And there's barely any wear on them. And part of that, a great part of that comes from the fact that in most electric vehicles these days, it's a one pedal driving situation because they have regenerative braking. And so your brakes are spared the wear and tear of normal stops.
Thank you, George.
Makes sense. Sounds like there's a bit of an offset there where there maybe the services aren't fully built out to the same degree, but it's offset by the fact that the vehicles really do require a lot less maintenance.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely the case. Remember when we started driving internal combustion engine cars that we purchased fuel at pharmacies, and that infrastructure took a while to build out, and the electric infrastructure will take a while to build out, but it'll get there. It's a good driving experience. I purchased and drove the electric cars in the beginning, not because I'm a greenie, but because it would go faster than my friend's new Corvette, and it's a 6,800-pound SUV. And over the years, the driving experience has been so pleasant that I've just continued to drive electric.
Interesting. Okay, George, did you have a question or another thing you wanted to address?
No questions on my part.
Okay, all right. Any other questions from?
Maybe my only other one is you mentioned potential winter driving. I'm curious if there's any other events that have, I guess, that you're considering after the success of this one.
Well, we've got one lined up for next summer. So that doesn't get to the cold weather questions and interests that we've been talking about here. But that's under that Department of Energy funded project, the EPIC project. And then because of the interest that we've got, we've been hearing from various stakeholders on the fleet manager side, as well as the individual or personal vehicle purchaser side. I think what we'd love to do is some version of this in the winter. And as some of those who are looking at the grant opportunities know, there's a lot of money, coming into the state through the Office of Department of Energy, Office of Vehicle Technology. And some of those can help with funding demonstrations. What we'd like to do is find the right opportunity, right funding match to bring funds in to do a cold weather test like we were just describing for light duties, and then also expand this out for those medium and heavy duty vehicles. And that's almost its own set of infrastructure that it's going to require because of the larger power requirements that a lot of those large trucks are going to have. You can use, in some cases, the same actual plug configuration for the light duties, in many cases actually, but you're going to need a whole lot more power and energy for those to effectively charge up quickly. So both of those, kind of the big vehicles, and then the cold weather testing is something that we're actively pursuing funding opportunities for. And I think one way or another, we're going to probably have some sort of a small couple of vehicles driving up there. And this could take the shape of doing something, not probably this winter, but next winter, 2023, 2024.
Cool.
Right.
Tim,
Okay.
talking about large, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bernie.
Okay, talking about large commercial vehicles, there's been a program, I can't remember the town, but where they have a school bus that's an electric, I want to say Delta Junction, but I'm not sure that's right. And have you heard any data from that's been going on for almost 18 months, maybe, or maybe 2 years? Have you been able to gather any data on that area? Because it's pretty doggone cold up there too.
It sure is. Yeah, that's a really amazing place to put on electric vehicle, as cold as say Fairbanks, that interior cold. So yes, Stretch Blackard is the individual who runs the Tok transportation operation over there. And as some of you who may have sat in on previous presentations from Alaska Energy Authority have heard, or presentations from myself and Michelle Wilbur from ASEP have heard, that is a project where data is being pulled. So Michelle Wilbur in particular is the researcher who looks at that, and some of her interns and staff members there at ASEP. But that project was funded through the Alaska Energy Authority, and that was done through the VW settlement money. Really quick sketch out of that. There was, the diesel issue that VW wasn't reporting adequately when there were sensors put up to their tailpipes, and there was a settlement that brought funds globally, and some of that was dispersed to Alaska. A lot of the money actually went to diesel replacements, going towards cleaner diesel engines. And then some of that went into electric vehicles. So what Stretch was able to take advantage of there was the diesel replacement money that was available to go from a traditional diesel school bus to an electric school bus. And because they're in Tok, which, of course, has a diesel generator, what was required, partially because of the settlement rules there, is to put solar panels on. So that was some of the cost match that they brought, Tok Transportation brought, was to put solar panels on top of the roof. And then to get back to your point, Bernie, about like, how is that doing? That's, or your question, that is doing pretty darn well. It's got the adequate temperature. Like there's a required temperature that needs to, I think it's 40 degrees at head level, that the kids need to be kept, or the interior temperature needs to be kept for those buses. And then for the vehicle, how it's performing in the cold, there is that range loss like we were talking about when it's cold. But for Stretch and for Tok Transportation, what they have is a place indoors to park that bus indoors when it's not in service. So that's a very beneficial thing to keep the whole bus and the battery pack warm. And then Stretch also has done some kind of aftermarket installation on the battery pack, and then some of the conductors there, or some of the chases there for the ventilation to help reduce the impact of the ambient temperature, cold temperatures on the batteries or the transmission of heat to the cabin. So he's done some work on that. There's a lot of interest, honestly, in that project because of its position and how cold it gets compared to other electric school bus locations. We're seeing there's an EPA funded program, a lot of the federal money that is out for school buses there going through EPA. And for us here in Alaska, we have kind of that northernmost example, which is not uncommon for us up here, as we know, but especially for Tok, that's a seriously cold spot that can help us understand how these vehicles perform. So that's one of those projects on the larger vehicles side that's out there, and data collection is ongoing. Another one briefly to mention is with the municipality of Anchorage. As some of you might know, the solid waste services there has a medium duty electric Peterbilt. That's essentially like a delivery vehicle. And then they'll be getting, as the SWS facility in Midtown is completed, getting 2 of those larger Class 8 Peterbilts, which are going to be battery electric. Those will be converted for refuse collection. Those are going to be supported by a charging station that actually has an integrated battery in it. And that battery is going to help with some load management at the facility, but also, of course, can buffer the impact of pulling a lot of power into those large vehicles instantaneously. So there'll be some energy drawn from the battery rather than directly from the grid. So there are a couple examples that are pretty cool and innovative that we've got here in Alaska of the larger vehicles that can be held up along with demonstration events like we were just talking about with the Arctic Road Rally. And the more we do of that demonstration work for all vehicle classes, I think is going to be helpful. The maturity there, the technological maturity there is good for light duty electric vehicles. Just as George was saying, he's been driving vehicles like this as well as many others for a bunch of years now. The OEMs that are new to the table and then also the legacy manufacturers have put a lot of money into this space and have done a lot of learning over those years to see what they can do to improve those user experiences. And then, of course, with the infrastructure requirements that we're talking about, that's catching up now too. All of it oriented to making sure it's accessible to a lot of folks, making the cost savings of electric vehicles accessible to a lot of folks here. So that's pretty good on the light duty side. There's more development work that is, in my opinion, needed for some applications like long haul trucking in particular. There's a limitation on range of those vehicles that doesn't quite match what the use case is for driving up the haul road, for example, without stopping to recharge. Now, if we're talking about medium and heavy duty for regional delivery or for local delivery, then there's a good fit technologically with medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. So lots of stuff to track here. But coming back to the rally, we had an amazing time. And again, the partnerships that were there were absolutely integral to making this whole thing come off well. And we were pleasantly surprised only to get 3 flat tires on that very rough road. I'm sure folks who've driven it themselves probably had at least one, So we had great performance on the vehicles and great dedication from folks like George, who is here with us, of course. As well as so many others. And we're looking forward to doing that again and having larger OEM participation and industry participation next year.
Great.
Okay, one last call. Any additional questions?
Hey, this is Lorelei from Usabelli Coal Mine. Tim, excellent presentation. I've been looking forward to this. I've missed your other presentations in other venues, but I really can't think of a better person leading this. So yeah, thanks again. And I do have some questions I'd like to follow up with you on. You mentioned decarbonizing, so I know how to reach you, and I'll find you here in the near future.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for coming off mute, Lorelei. I look forward to talking again.
Yeah, good to see you. Bye.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm not even sure if you guys can hear me right now because it says my connection is unstable. Okay, thumbs up from Bernie and Tim. All right, well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, and especially thank Tim for giving us a great overview of the road rally, what happened, some of the takeaways from that opportunity, and look forward to hearing from you about future opportunities for demonstration projects, including next year's road rally. And with that, I will just say that we have some upcoming study sessions in the planning process for November and December. Unfortunately, nothing to confirm at this point, but I will ask you all to save December 7th for our 17th annual legislator meet and greet, which is one of the signature events for Commonwealth North and a great opportunity to bring forward policy questions and priorities for any of the areas, the spaces that you're working in, and talk directly to legislators about how that might be addressed during the upcoming legislative session. So
I just lost you.
Yep.
Well, again, Tim, thank you. It's been a very good, informative presentation, and y'all are really doing a great job, not only with the transportation, but all the other issues that are out there for our state that y'all are innovators for. So thank you for being a part of Launch Alaska. So,
thank you, Bernie. So much appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye.